All right, good morning. This is our first video for second semester. Docendo discimus, we call it. Remember, that means by teaching, we learn. So the idea is the things that we talk about in this video, you should be able to basically teach to somebody else. And that's just a good way to see what you know and what you don't know. Good metacognitive tool. And then the idea is these videos will be used during the asynchronous days, the days we don't meet, and then I'll give you a little quiz at Schoology on them. So as you watch, pay attention, take notes, whatever you need to do. You can obviously refer to this because I'll have it posted online. So the first thing we want to do is look at a sentence and edit this sentence. So she never rushed into any decision. Instead, she was always circumspect and thoughtful. The other word there is just another word to contrast with circumspect, circuitous. Watch out for the pronunciation on these words too. So looking at this sentence, she never rushed into any decision. That looks like a pretty straightforward sentence. Instead, she was always circumspect and thoughtful. So it looks like we've got two clauses. So we got one clause here. She never rushed into any decision. We could stop there. And then we have another clause. She was always circumspect. Now, instead is not a coordinating conjunction. It's not a fan voice, right? It's a conjunctive adverb. And when you use conjunctive adverbs like a coordinated conjunction, you have to use a semicolon and then a comma. So now we can connect these two ideas to show a contrast instead. I think it makes sense. So she was always circuitous and thoughtful. Now we're just talking about two things, two adjectives that describe whoever she is. And in that case, we don't need a comma. Again, we have a coordinated conjunction, but we only put a comma to signal that we had another idea, complete idea is coming. And we just have one word, not a whole complete idea. So now I think we have a correct sentence. So looking at this word, circumspect, obviously you can see circumference, circle has something to do with circles. Spect has to do with vision. So what is our definition here? Circumspect is an adjective meaning careful to consider all circumstances and possible consequences, cautious. So a very good word to describe somebody who's being very attentive, very attention, showing lots of attention to detail like you do when you edit, watching out for what can go wrong. Being circumspect. Basically, you can see the Latin there. You've got circular, and then you've got looking around. So your head is on a swivel, literally, anyway. And then circuitous is having a circular or winding course. So if I said, hey, I want you to walk down to the library from my classroom, that's pretty much a straight path. But if you take a circuitous route, you would, instead of leaving the classroom going to the left, you'd go to the right, you'd go down the stairs, you'd go down to the cafeteria, then to the office, then to the library. That would be a circuitous route. Okay, now looking at our sentence here, she never rushed into any decision. Instead, she was always circumspect and thoughtful. Again, we should be able to look at that sentence and say, okay, we have two complete clauses. Everything in that sentence should make sense to you. And if it doesn't, feel free to ask me during class. But again, this would be a compound sentence because we have two complete sentences that are connected by the instead, the conjunctive adverb, and it's complete. Now, I also want to look at a couple words from the past. So think about two verbs. One is to connect in a systematic way to establish mutual relations of. Be nice to have one word for that when you make connections and you look around your world and you start looking at things and how things relate, cause and effect. And then collect and combine texts in proper order. So you're putting things in their proper order. You're organizing things. What would be a verb for that? Well, these are two words that come to us from Latin, with the Latin root having to do with to carry or to bear, and they are correlate. That's the verb, and of course correlation would be the noun form. And then collate is the one to collect and combine, to organize things. So we obviously sometimes talk about correlations. Sometimes we talk about false correlations, such as every time the sun has risen, I have heard a rooster crow, and therefore the rooster's crow must cause the sun to rise. Well, that would be a false correlation. All right, so I wanted to look at the sentence we just fixed. Let's say we wanted to change this sentence. Instead of making it a compound, we wanted to make it a complex sentence. So I'm not sure if you know those terms, but don't worry too much about them. But the idea is that this one, we basically have two sentences that we connected. Well, this sentence is very similar to the other one, except notice the first part of it. It can't stand by itself because she was always circumspect. That is what we call a dependent clause. And the reason it's dependent is because it has a complete clause, a subject, she, and a verb, was, but it's got the because that makes the first clause dependent. So when you combine a dependent clause with an independent clause, we call that a compound, or actually a complex sentence, sorry. So this sentence here, two independent clauses, is compound. This one is complex. And want to make sure we know those distinctions just to have flexibility when we're putting sentences together. These both sentences are correct, but you as an editor might look at these two sentences and say, well, I think one of these is better. And you could have an argument, again, rhetorically, not based on what's correct or incorrect, but based on which one you like the best. Maybe I would say this one's better because it's more concise. Maybe I want to make that distinction and have that repetition of the she, just for clarity's sake. Again, two arguments, but they're both correct. So I want to talk about writing complex sentences and adverb clauses. So this clause, because she was always circumspect, that's called an adverb clause. And whenever you use a word like because to make the clause dependent, it's called an adverb clause. So let's say we have these two clauses. Mary ate lunch, Mary walked to class. Not very sophisticated, but we'd probably say, well, we wouldn't want to leave them the way they are. We should combine them to make one sentence. So we could say, after lunch, Mary walked to class. Notice this one, after lunch, that's just a phrase, isn't it? There's no verb in there. So a perfectly okay way to do it. We just got rid of the verb here and just said after lunch instead of when she ate lunch. So this would be a simple sentence because we have the one clause, Mary walked to class. This sentence, Mary ate lunch, then she walked to class. Notice this, not a fanboys. This is another one of those conjunctive adverbs, then. There's no T in fanboys. So we'll notice we combine these with using a semicolon and a comma. And then this last version, notice what we did here, she ate lunch, we put after in front of it. After is one of those words that makes this clause dependent. So after she ate lunch, subject, verb, Mary walked to class. Notice this cannot stand alone. If somebody walked in the room and said, after she ate lunch, you'd say, okay, finish the idea. There's no complete sentence there, even though there is a subject and a verb. So that would be dependent. We connect it to the independent clause. Now we have a complex sentence. Okay, let's try this out here. Identify the dependent clause in each sentence below. So I've highlighted these so you can see them. I don't want to give you a raise because you don't deserve it. Notice that because is one indication. And when you have a subject and a verb, then it's a complete clause. If you're going to quit, I don't want to give you a raise. Notice we got the if. If is another one of those words that makes this dependent. You are going to quit would be a complete sentence, but when you say if you're going to quit, it makes it a dependent clause. Notice this one, the class, after they learned about nouns, studied verbs. So even though it's not the beginning or the end, it's in the middle, but we've got the subject class, the class studied verbs, that's the independent clause, and then after they learn, notice subject, verb, after they learned about nouns. So we should know some distinction between two types of conjunctions that we use. And again, the only reason we need to know these is just so that we can make compound sentences versus complex sentences. So when you use for, and, nor, but, or yet, or so, again, those are the ideas from fanboys. Those connect two independent clauses. That is your classic compound sentence. So let's just say compound sentence. Coordinating conjunctions are used for complex. These, there's a little acronym. It's not a very, not quite as nice as fanboys, but SWABI. And again, these aren't all of the subordinated conjunctions, but these are the most common ones. Certainly because, if, after, when. These are the very common conjunctions. And you'll notice what they deal with. They deal with time, when something happened. They deal with cause and effect because they make connections. And they deal with contrasts. So you should just, you don't have to memorize those, but just kind of notice how those are different from especially coordinated conjunctions. Okay, now the other thing I want you to do after you watch this video is I want you to go to this website, worddays.net, and I want you to take a look at 3 dates. We have this thing here. This is a blog that I do, and it's called The Thinker's Almanac. February 9th, which is tomorrow, is about the $10,000 rule. Not $10,000, 10,000 hour rule. And I want you to understand what that is in relationship to success. So read this. It has to do with the Beatles, the greatest band in the history of music. No argument there. Then don't worry about this one. This is a different kind of a entry. I want you to do the Thinker's Almanac for 3 days. So February 8th. This one is about hippocampal plasticity. Now that's a big word, big phrase, but hopefully you'll understand it better when you read about what happens with the London taxi drivers and the tests that they have to take. And believe it or not, you all have a hippocampus. And you all have neural plasticity. Hopefully you'll know about that after you read this. And then there's one more I want you to read, not this one, but February 7th Thinker Almanac, which has to do with nudges. And if you've never heard of a nudge, you're going to know what a nudge is. And believe it or not, a nudge has to do, at least an example of a nudge would be a fly in an airport urinal, like this one here. So again, read these 3, and there will be some questions on the Asynchronous 1 quiz that I will post that will deal with the things we did in this video, which includes the Thinker's Almanac, the 3 days, the 7th, 8th, and 9th, and the other parts that we did in the Dokendo. So that is it for our first asynchronous video. I'll see you later.